Have you ever noticed how you can have a great day, get a ton of praise, but then one tiny criticism just ruins it? Today, we're diving into that frustrating little glitch in our brains, and we're going to figure out why the bad stuff seems to stick so much more than the good.
So let's just do a quick thought experiment here. Imagine your boss pulls you aside, gives you 10 pieces of fantastic feedback, but then adds just one, small critique. Now be honest, hours later as you're trying to fall asleep, which one are you replaying in your mind? Yeah, for most of us, it's that single negative comment, right? Well, if that scenario hit a little too close to home, don't worry, you're definitely not alone. This isn't some kind of personal flaw, it's a fundamental feature of our human wiring. And believe it or not, science actually has a name for this negative glitch in our brains. It's called the negativity bias, and it's a really big deal in psychology. It basically explains that our brains are hardwired to give way more weight to bad experiences than good ones. We don't just notice them more, we learn from them faster, and man, we remember them more vividly. It's the reason a single insult can feel so much heavier than a dozen compliments.
You know, I absolutely love this analogy from neuropsychologist Rick Hansen. He says our brains are basically like Velcro for bad experiences and Teflon for the good ones. The negative stuff just latches on and sticks, while all those positive moments, they often just slide right off unless we make a real conscious effort to grab onto them. So why are we built this way? Well, it's not a bug. It's actually an ancient survival feature. Think about it from our ancestors' perspective. If you ignored a compliment, what was the cost? Pretty low. You just missed out on a warm, fuzzy feeling. But if you ignored a potential threat, like a rustle in the bushes that might be a predator, well, the cost there was incredibly high. That could be a fatal mistake. So, the most cautious, paranoid, danger-aware brains were the ones that survived to pass on their genes to us.
Okay, so that ancient survival skill was fantastic for dodging saber-toothed tigers. But how does it show up in our modern world? Well, a lot of the time, it creates these mental traps or glitches that completely warp how we see reality.
Psychologists have a name for these traps: cognitive distortions. And the analogy on this slide is just perfect. They're like mental funhouse mirrors. They take a real situation, but they stretch it, they warp it, they exaggerate the bad parts and shrink the good ones. So what we're seeing in our head isn't an accurate reflection of what actually happened.
So the first step is just learning to spot these distortions. Let's start with a classic, one that perfectionists know all too well: all or nothing thinking. When this filter is on, everything is black or white. You're either a smashing success or you're a complete and total failure. There's just no middle ground, no room for good enough or partial wins.
This quote from the Feeling Good Handbook is such a perfect, almost painfully relatable example of this trap in action. The initial mistake is so tiny, a spoonful of ice cream, but that all or nothing mindset blows it up into a catastrophe, which then, of course, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sound familiar to anyone?
Okay, here's another trap that my own brain loves to fall into: overgeneralizing. This is when we take one single negative event and we blow it up into what feels like a never-ending pattern of defeat. You'll hear words like always and never pop up a lot with this one. And this slide lays out a perfect example. A single disappointing date instantly becomes, "This always happens to me. I'll never find love." See how that works? One isolated event gets twisted into this permanent, sweeping, negative conclusion about your entire life. It's a pattern of defeat that we're literally creating in our own head. Now, our third trap is called mental filtering. And this one is super tricky because it feels like you're just being realistic. But what's really happening is you're zooming in on one single negative detail and letting it color your entire experience, completely filtering out all the good stuff that happened. The metaphor on this slide from David Burns is just spot on. He says it's like a single drop of ink that discolors an entire beaker of water. You know that one negative comment from the very beginning of our explainer? That's the drop of ink. It poisons the memory of an otherwise perfectly good. All right, so we've seen what these traps look like, but that still leaves a really big question: why? Why are the negative thoughts so much stickier? Why do they feel so much more real and powerful than the positive ones? To answer that, we've got to look at the neuroscience. The science behind this is actually fascinating. You see, strong emotions, especially negative ones like fear or anxiety, they act like a giant save button in your brain. Stress hormones basically supercharge your brain's memory center, screaming, "Hey, pay attention, this is important, remember this so it doesn't happen again."
And look, this isn't just a feeling we have. The data really backs this up. One study found that when people were given new negative information, it completely overturned their positive conclusion about 75% of the time. But when positive info challenged a negative conclusion, it only worked about a third of the time. The takeaway here is pretty stark. In our minds, bad is literally more than twice as powerful as good. Now, I know this might all be sounding a little bleak, but here's the most important part, the big takeaway. Our brains might have these negative default settings, but we are not stuck with them. We can absolutely learn to recognize the funhouse mirrors, and we can learn to rewrite those automatic negative scripts that play in our heads.
So here's the key, and this is really important. You can't just stop negative thoughts. I mean, trying to suppress them is like someone telling you, don't think of a pink elephant. It's impossible. The goal isn't to block them, it's to get curious and to investigate them. And this powerful technique is called cognitive restructuring. So how do we actually do this? Well, this slide breaks it down into 4 simple steps. First, you identify the trigger. What just happened? Second, you recognize the automatic thought. What's the story you immediately started telling yourself? Now, the third step is the most important one. You have to challenge that thought. Put it on trial. Ask yourself, is this thought 100% true? What's the evidence against it? Is there any other way to look at this situation? And finally, step 4 is to reframe it. Replace that distorted thought with one that's more realistic, more balanced, and a lot kinder.
And this is why this is such a game changer. Every single time you pause, notice, and question one of these distorted thoughts, you weaken its power over you. You start to realize you are not your thoughts. You are the one observing your thoughts. And by stepping back and challenging them, you take back control. You regain a sense of agency over your own mind. So that brings us to our final challenge for you. The next time you feel that familiar tug of a negative thought, don't just let it run the show. Pause. Get curious. Question it. What's one automatic thought you can challenge today? Thanks so much for joining us.